Judge issues arrest warrant for Jennifer Lopez after shocking Ben Affleck testimony in Diddy trial. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The air in the courtroom was tense, thick with anticipation. The high-profile Diddy trial had already captivated the media world for weeks, but nothing could have prepared anyone for the seismic shockwave that was about to rip through the Hollywood elite. The atmosphere was electric, a volatile mix of curiosity and suspense, as Ben Affleck made his way to the witness stand. As he settled in, adjusting his suit and looking out over the sea of reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers, he knew this was a pivotal moment. Not just for Diddy, but for his own life and, more crucially, his marriage to Jennifer Lopez. Affleck had always been known for his composed, reserved demeanor, but as he glanced at the table where Lopez sat, her expression unreadable, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. He had agreed to testify for the prosecution, partly due to his ties to Diddy and partly because of his strong sense of justice, but now that he was on the stand, the enormity of the situation was becoming clearer. Every word he spoke could change the course of not only the trial, but of his own life. He had known the dangers of Hollywood scandals. After all, his own life had been subjected to the media's harsh microscope for years. Yet nothing had prepared him for what was about to unfold. The prosecutor stood and began the questioning, easing into the topic of Affleck's relationship with Diddy. They discussed their long history together, recounting collaborations, mutual acquaintances, and their shared work in Hollywood. Affleck's answers were measured, calculated, but as the line of questioning progressed, the prosecutor's tone became more pointed. Then, out of nowhere, the prosecutor shifted focus to Jennifer Lopez. "Mr. Affleck," the prosecutor began, his voice deliberate, "could you tell us about any involvement your wife may have had in the Hollywood scandal involving several high-profile figures? Were you aware of her role in these events?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Lopez shifted in her seat, her gaze fixed on Affleck, her face betraying little emotion. Affleck hesitated. His first instinct was to protect his wife, to shield her from the past that had quietly followed her through the years. But the weight of the courtroom's gaze was unbearable. He glanced at his lawyer, who gave a small, nearly imperceptible nod, signaling that he should answer truthfully. Affleck's voice cracked slightly as he began to speak. "I don't think anyone in Hollywood is without their share of controversy, but Jennifer was never involved in what's being alleged here today," he said, his words careful. But then, to the shock of everyone present, Affleck paused, his mind racing. He knew something he couldn't ignore. There was a moment in time, a dark chapter, where Jennifer had been caught up in something far deeper than anyone realized. It wasn't just the media's whispers. He had seen it firsthand. "I need to clarify," he continued, his voice trembling now. "Years ago, Jennifer was unknowingly tied to an incident involving some powerful figures in the industry. She didn't know the full scope, but I was made aware of it, and it's something that has been kept from the public. It was an attempt to bury the truth, a major scandal that some people wanted hidden." The words felt like stones falling into the silent, tense atmosphere. The courtroom gasped, as did the reporters in the back row. Jennifer's eyes widened, her hand gripping the edge of the table. This was not the truth she had expected Ben to reveal. She had known there were rumors, vague whispers of a past she wanted buried, but hearing it laid out in front of an audience of millions was another matter entirely. She felt the walls closing in on her as she struggled to keep her composure. The weight of her past, the shadows she thought had been erased, was now front and center. The scandal Affleck referred to was a part of her life that she had worked so hard to keep hidden. The prosecutor, sensing the vulnerability in the room, pressed harder. "So, what exactly was Jennifer's involvement in this scandal?" he asked, his voice almost dripping with anticipation. Affleck closed his eyes briefly, his thoughts scattered. He wanted to protect her, he always did. But the truth, for better or worse, had been dragged into the light. He could feel the tension in the air as his next words echoed throughout the courtroom. "Jennifer did not actively participate," Affleck said, his voice steady now. "But she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was caught up in the events of that night, and while she may not have known what was truly going on, her presence was enough to implicate her." The courtroom fell into an almost unnatural silence. The judge, clearly shaken by the unexpected turn of events, called for a recess. The reporters rushed to their phones, sending texts and filing stories before the break even ended. The media had already begun to spin their own narratives, some claiming that the truth was finally out, others questioning whether Affleck had been manipulated into testifying against his wife. As the room emptied, the murmurs of disbelief continued to grow louder. Ben Affleck, who had once been the golden boy of Hollywood, was now a man caught between loyalty to the truth and loyalty to the woman he loved. Jennifer Lopez, on the other hand, was left with a question that loomed over her. Could she clear her name, or had the damage already been done? The following morning, the fallout from Ben Affleck's testimony hit like a tidal wave. The world had barely recovered from the shock of his words, and now, a new bombshell had dropped. The judge overseeing the Diddy trial had issued an arrest warrant for Jennifer Lopez. The media exploded with headlines as the arrest warrant made its way into every news outlet and social media platform. Jennifer Lopez, arrest warrant issued after Ben Affleck's shocking testimony, screamed the front pages of tabloids. The frenzy was unstoppable. Lopez's team quickly went into damage control mode, but it was clear that the situation was escalating. Her publicist released a statement, attempting to distance Lopez from the allegations. "These claims are unfounded," the statement said. Jennifer Lopez categorically denies any involvement in the so-called scandal mentioned during the trial. The arrest warrant is based on a misunderstanding, and Jennifer is fully cooperating with the authorities to clear her name. Despite the reassurance from her team, the damage was already done. The world had already made up its mind, or at least that's how it felt. The fans, the media, and the public had taken to social media in droves, expressing their shock, disappointment, and in some cases, outright anger. Jennifer Lopez, who had spent over 2 decades carefully crafting an image as one of the most powerful and respected women in Hollywood, was now at the center of a scandal that seemed to threaten everything she had worked for. Fans who had once idolized her, praising her for her resilience and rise to the top, were now turning on her. How could she be involved in something like this? One tweet read. "She's not the woman I thought she was," another added. On the other side of the spectrum, there were those who rallied behind Lopez, rejecting the accusations as nothing more than a smear campaign. "Let's wait for the truth," they said. "She's been nothing but an inspiration. We stand with J.Lo." But the situation was far from simple. With the arrest warrant officially in play, Lopez's name was now tied to a criminal investigation. If she was truly innocent, the media storm would eventually blow over. But if the allegations were true, the consequences would be catastrophic. Not just for Lopez, but for her relationship with Ben Affleck, and for her entire career. Hollywood wasn't known for its second chances, and the whispers of her involvement in a shady, long-forgotten incident now threatened to follow her for the rest of her life. For Lopez, the arrest warrant was not just a legal problem, it was a public relations nightmare. She had carefully maintained a spotless image in the eyes of her fans, her colleagues, and the industry. The scandal threatened to tear all of that apart in an instant. As if this wasn't enough, the added weight of her relationship with Ben Affleck was now under the microscope. Their marriage, once seen as the embodiment of Hollywood romance, was now in jeopardy. Their fans had placed them on a pedestal, and now that pedestal was crumbling beneath them. Ben, on the other hand, was torn. The man who had stood by her side, who had fought to protect their relationship and their private lives, was now grappling with the fallout from his own testimony. He had spoken the truth, but at what cost? The arrest warrant was the result of his words, and now Jennifer was paying the price. Affleck had always been open about the complicated nature of their relationship, but he never imagined it would come to this. Late at night, when the lights in their mansion dimmed and the reporters had gone home, Ben and Jennifer were left to face each other. The weight of the situation hung in the air, palpable and suffocating. Jennifer sat across from him, her face a mixture of disbelief and frustration. She couldn't understand how this had all spiraled so quickly. "Ben," she said quietly, her voice tinged with emotion, "how could you not have told me about that moment? Why didn't you warn me before you went on the stand?" Ben looked at her, guilt etching deep lines into his features. "I didn't think it would come to this," he admitted, his voice thick with regret. "I thought the truth had to come out, but now I see, maybe I should have handled it differently." He reached for her hand, but Jennifer pulled away slightly, her emotions running too high for comfort. "You should have protected me. You should have kept that part of our past in the past. You put me in a position I never wanted to be in." He took a deep breath, struggling to maintain his composure. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jennifer. I did what I thought was right, but I see now how much damage it's caused." His words hung in the air, thick with the weight of his confession. Jennifer shook her head, trying to hold back tears. I've spent my whole life running from this, keeping my secrets, doing everything I can to protect myself and the people I love. And now it's all coming back to haunt me. The truth was out, but it wasn't enough to absolve her of the damage it had done. As she stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance, she knew she had a choice to make. She could let this scandal define her, or she could fight it with everything she had left. The road ahead was uncertain, and the media would continue to hound her. But she knew that if she wanted to preserve her career, her image, and her future with Ben, she would have to clear her name. "I'm not going down without a fight," Jennifer said quietly, more to herself than to Ben. "I'm going to prove that I didn't do anything wrong." And with that resolve, she knew that the battle was far from over. But she wasn't going to let this scandal define her legacy. She would fight tooth and nail to clear her name, no matter the cost. The public opinion might have turned against her, but Jennifer Lopez had never been one to back down from a challenge. And this would be no different. The days following the arrest warrant issued for Jennifer Lopez were a blur of chaos and confusion. The media's coverage of her case was relentless. Their cameras trained on her every move, and every inch of her private life had been turned into public fodder. News outlets, both reputable and tabloid, speculated on every detail, drawing conclusions, fueling rumors, and in some cases, outright misrepresenting the facts. The public, who had once idolized her as the epitome of glamour and success, now found themselves torn between skepticism and support. Jennifer had always been able to navigate the spotlight with ease. Her career had been built on a combination of hard work, perseverance, and an unrelenting drive to succeed. She had mastered the art of managing her image, carefully constructing a narrative that showcased her as both a fierce businesswoman and an accessible, likable figure. But this was different. This was not about her achievements or her performances. This was about her integrity, her character, and whether or not she was hiding a dark truth that had been kept from the world for years. The media storm raged on, and in the eye of it all, Jennifer found herself battling not just for her reputation, but for her future. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. The constant pressure of facing down accusations, not to mention the public's insatiable thirst for gossip, was starting to take a toll. But Jennifer knew she couldn't let it break her. She had too much at stake. By the time the press conference was scheduled, the anticipation had reached fever pitch. The public was desperate for answers. Was Jennifer Lopez guilty of the scandal that Ben Affleck had alluded to in court? Or was this all a massive misunderstanding? The stakes had never been higher, and the eyes of the world were fixed squarely on her. The conference was held in a grand hotel ballroom in the heart of Los Angeles, the glittering city that had once embraced Jennifer as one of its brightest stars. But today, there was no glamour in the air, only tension and the harsh buzz of camera lenses. Reporters stood in tight clusters, whispering among themselves, all eager to catch a glimpse of the woman at the center of the storm. Lopez's public relations team had worked tirelessly to prepare a statement, but Jennifer knew that it wasn't just about reading prepared lines. This was her moment to reclaim her narrative. When she walked into the room, she was dressed in a simple yet elegant white blouse and black trousers, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She looked composed, but her eyes, though focused, betrayed a flicker of vulnerability. The room went silent as she stepped up to the podium, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. This wasn't just another media appearance. This was the defining moment of her career. The reporters didn't waste any time, throwing questions at her from all sides. "Ms. Lopez, what do you have to say about the arrest warrant issued in your name? Can you deny any involvement in the scandal Mr. Affleck mentioned in court?" a reporter asked, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. Jennifer took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking. "I want to be absolutely clear," she began, her voice strong but calm. "I have never been involved in any criminal activity, and I am not guilty of what has been claimed about me." She paused, her eyes scanning the room as she gathered her thoughts. "What you heard in court from Mr. Affleck is not the whole story. There are pieces of this that have been twisted and taken out of context. My name is being dragged through the mud, and that is something I will not stand for." The cameras flashed and reporters scribbled in their notepads, but the room felt electric with uncertainty. Jennifer could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. But she refused to back down. "I understand that there are questions about my past. I've made mistakes like everyone else," she continued, her tone becoming more impassioned. "But I have always tried to learn from them. I am not perfect, but I am not a criminal." A reporter from the back of the room raised his hand. What do you say to those who believe Ben Affleck's testimony is truthful? Do you think he was manipulated into saying what he did? Jennifer's gaze flickered to the side for a moment, where Ben's name had been mentioned. She knew the reporters would push that angle, but addressing it head-on was going to be difficult. Ben had been her partner in both business and life, and he had, unwittingly, become part of the storm. I don't believe Ben was trying to hurt me, she replied slowly, her voice softer now. Ben did what he thought was right at the time. He is someone who values honesty, and I can understand that. But I can also tell you that there were aspects of the story he wasn't fully aware of. The room grew quieter. What aspects? A reporter asked, eager for a more detailed explanation. Jennifer's eyes narrowed slightly, the weight of her response looming over her. That is not something I am ready to discuss publicly just yet. What I will say is that I will be working with my legal team to address these allegations in court. Everything will come to light, and I will fight to clear my name. The questions continued to come, each one more pointed than the last, but Jennifer remained composed. She knew that no matter how many times she spoke, the media would continue to speculate. She couldn't control that. What she could control was how she responded, and she wasn't going to let them paint her as something she wasn't. By the end of the press conference, Jennifer had made her stance clear. She would not be intimidated. She would not back down. But even as the room cleared out, the questions remained. Could she prove her innocence? And if so, how long would it take before the public believed her again? The days that followed were even more grueling than the ones before. News outlets continued to churn out coverage, each piece seeming to twist the narrative further. Meanwhile, Jennifer had to balance the pressure of her public life with the urgency of her legal battle. She wasn't just fighting for her reputation, she was fighting for her future. And in a world where fame was fleeting, she knew that one scandal could be enough to ruin everything. The courtroom loomed closer, and Jennifer knew that the only way to end this nightmare was to expose the truth, no matter what it might cost. But as she stared down the road ahead, one thing was certain. The fight for her name and her career was just beginning. Behind the closed doors of their sprawling mansion, Ben Affleck sat in silence, his mind consumed by the events of the past few days. He had spent the last several years of his life working hard to rebuild his career, to prove to the world, and more importantly to himself, that he could be more than the tabloid fodder that had once consumed his every move. His relationship with Jennifer Lopez had been one of the few constants in the ever-shifting world of Hollywood, a grounding force that had brought him both peace and joy. But now that peace was shattered. The testimony he had delivered on the stand had set a series of events into motion that neither he nor Jennifer could have anticipated. Ben was no stranger to Hollywood scandals. He had lived through his own highly publicized relationships, career missteps, and struggles with the media. But this was different. He had spoken the truth on the stand, but the consequences of that truth were now far-reaching, and the toll it was taking on Jennifer, his wife, was something he couldn't ignore. She was his partner, the one person who had always stood by him, even when the world was ready to tear him down. And now, here she was, accused of something so horrific that it threatened to undo everything she had worked for, everything they had built together. He walked across the room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. The weight of his actions pressed down on him with suffocating force. He had never meant to hurt Jennifer. He had only wanted to be honest, to bring the truth into the open. But now, as the arrest warrant had been issued and the media storm raged around them, he couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps he had made a grave mistake. Could he have said less in his testimony? Could he have protected her, shielded her from the past that had resurfaced with such brutal intensity? Had he been manipulated by the prosecution, unknowingly allowing his words to become a weapon against the woman he loved? He sat down at the kitchen table, his fingers nervously tapping on the wood. His phone buzzed with messages, but he ignored them, unwilling to face the outside world just yet. Ben knew he had to speak to Jennifer. He couldn't avoid her forever. He needed to apologize, to explain himself, to try and make sense of the situation that had spiraled beyond anyone's control. But even more than that, he needed to make sure she knew that he was there for her, that he hadn't turned his back on her despite everything that had happened. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Jennifer entered the room, her expression weary but determined. She had been in constant meetings with her legal team, preparing for the next phase of the legal battle, but the weight of it all was clearly starting to show. Ben stood up as she walked toward him, his heart sinking as he saw the strain in her eyes. Jen, he started, his voice low, full of guilt. I know I've messed up. I should have handled this differently, but I thought I was doing the right thing. I never imagined it would escalate like this. Jennifer stopped in her tracks, her gaze fixed on him. For a moment, there was a heavy silence between them, both of them grappling with their emotions. The accusation of criminal activity against her had shaken her to the core, but the strain of their relationship, their marriage, was almost harder to bear. I don't know what to think right now, Ben, Jennifer replied, her voice tight. I've been trying to stay strong through all of this, but the truth is I feel so exposed. You made a decision in that courtroom, and now I have to pay the price for it. I don't know if I can get through this, and I don't know if you can help me. The words stung. Ben had always prided himself on being her protector, the one person who could shield her from the world's cruelty. But now, in the wake of his own testimony, he couldn't help but feel like the one who had torn down the walls that had kept them safe. I never meant to put you in this position, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You mean everything to me, Jen. I did what I thought was right, but now I see the consequences. I see the hurt I've caused. I'll do anything to make it right, I swear. Jennifer's expression softened for a moment, but there was no mistaking the pain in her eyes. I need you to understand something, Ben, she said, her voice growing stronger. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about my reputation, my career. And I don't know if we can just fix it like that. She snapped her fingers, the frustration in her tone evident. We've worked so hard to get to where we are. And now everything feels like it's crumbling. Ben knew the pain in her words was valid. The scandal had not only put her under a microscope, but had now made her question everything she had fought for. The backlash from fans, the media coverage, the public judgment, it was all taking its toll on her. And as much as he wanted to offer a quick solution, he knew that there was no quick fix. There were no easy answers in this situation. But there was one thing he could do. He could be there for her. He could be the steady hand that she had always been for him. I don't have all the answers, but I will be with you through every step of this, Ben said, his voice steady with conviction. I'll stand by you, Jennifer. Whatever it takes, I'm not going anywhere. Jennifer looked at him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and uncertainty. The weight of the situation was heavy, and she knew that they would face many challenges ahead. But for the first time since the chaos had begun, she felt a glimmer of hope. Ben was still there, and that, for now, was enough. Okay, she said, her voice softer. We'll get through this. Together. But as the night wore on, Ben couldn't shake the nagging feeling that their relationship, everything they had fought for, was on the brink of collapse. He had made a promise to stand by Jennifer, but in the shadow of the scandal, could their love survive the truth? And even if they weathered the storm together, would their marriage and their careers ever truly be the same again? The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Ben Affleck would do whatever it took to protect the woman he loved. And this fight, no matter how dark it seemed, was far from over. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Every seat was taken, and even those standing along the walls seemed to be holding their breath as the latest chapter of the Diddy trial unfolded. Jennifer Lopez had arrived, her face a picture of composure, though the weight of the situation was evident in the tightness of her shoulders. She had prepared for this day for weeks, but now, as she sat at the defendant's table, her emotions were a tangled mess of fear, anger, and determination. Her legal team was ready. They had worked tirelessly behind the scenes to prepare a defense that could discredit the allegations made against her. But this was more than just a legal battle. It was a fight for her life, her reputation, and everything she had worked for. The arrest warrant had been a shock, but now, facing the full force of the courtroom, Jennifer knew that this was her moment to clear her name or risk losing everything. Across the courtroom, Ben Affleck sat in the witness stand, his face drawn, his eyes locked on Jennifer. He had been summoned to testify again, and though his loyalty to her was unwavering, his testimony had become a double-edged sword. Every word he spoke could either help her case or sink it further into the abyss. The last time he had been on the stand, he had tried to protect her by being truthful, but now he found himself trapped in a situation he had never imagined. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Jessica Green, stood up and approached the podium, her heels clicking on the hard floor with a rhythmic, almost calculated sound. She was about to make her case, and she wasn't about to pull any punches. The room fell silent as she addressed the court. Your Honor, we have already heard from Mr. Affleck regarding the allegations tied to Jennifer Lopez. His testimony was clear. He witnessed Ms. Lopez's involvement in a scandal that, until now, had been hidden from the public eye. We have presented the facts, and now, it is time for the defense to prove that Ms. Lopez is not guilty of what we claim. She turned toward Lopez and her legal team. The prosecution maintains that Ms. Lopez's presence in this scandal, no matter how indirect, has tarnished her reputation, and as such, she must face the consequences of her actions. Jennifer's heart pounded in her chest as the prosecutor spoke. The words stung, but she refused to let them break her. She knew her lawyers were ready, and she trusted them completely. Her defense attorney, a seasoned litigator named Thomas Keller, stood up to counter Green's claims. He was tall and composed, his reputation for defending high-profile clients earning him a place at the table when Jennifer needed him most. Your Honor, while Mr. Affleck's testimony is indeed alarming, Keller began, his voice steady and authoritative, it is crucial to consider the context in which these events occurred. My client, Ms. Lopez, had no knowledge of the so-called scandal at the time. She was simply an innocent bystander caught in a situation beyond her control. There is no evidence to suggest that she was involved in any criminal activity, and the charges against her are based on speculation and assumption, not facts. The defense's statement resonated with the jury. They leaned forward, absorbing the arguments with a growing sense of intrigue. Jennifer held her breath, hoping that her side would prevail. But she knew the battle was far from over. As the proceedings continued, Jennifer's thoughts drifted to the past, to the moment when the scandal had first emerged. She had always known there were whispers, secrets that had been buried in the shadows. Hollywood was full of skeletons, after all. But she never imagined that those whispers would come back to haunt her in such a public and explosive way. The truth she had tried to keep hidden was now out in the open, and it was not just a part of her past. It was threatening to rewrite her entire future. The prosecutor's next move was a calculated one. She called upon a surprise witness, someone who had been close to Jennifer during the time of the alleged scandal. The witness was introduced as a former associate who claimed to have information that could prove Jennifer's direct involvement in the events that had been described. The room went silent as the witness took the stand, a woman named Maria Vasquez. Jennifer's pulse quickened as the woman began speaking, recounting events from a time that Jennifer had hoped would remain forgotten. Maria described a night where Jennifer had attended a party at a high-profile producer's mansion, a party that, according to Maria, had been filled with illicit activities and influential figures. Maria's testimony was damning, suggesting that Jennifer had been part of a web of corruption and scandal, though the details remained vague. Jennifer's defense team immediately objected, claiming that the witness's recollection was unreliable and that her statements were based on hearsay. The judge overruled the objection, allowing the testimony to stand. Jennifer's heart sank. She had known Maria. They had worked together years ago, but they had parted ways under less than friendly circumstances. Now, it seemed that Maria had come forward with a story that painted Jennifer in a much darker light than she had ever imagined. But Jennifer couldn't let this moment define her. She had to stay strong. The defense team went on the offensive, tearing apart Maria's credibility. Your Honor, Keller said, this woman's testimony is not based on first-hand knowledge. She was not present during the critical moments she is describing, and her account has been proven to be inconsistent with the facts. This is nothing more than an attempt to drag Ms. Lopez's name through the mud. Despite the fierce defense, the damage had been done. The jury's eyes were now on Jennifer, and their skepticism was evident. She could feel the weight of their judgment, even as she tried to maintain her composure. Then, in a move that no one had expected, Jennifer stood up. She walked to the witness stand, her heels clicking loudly in the quiet room. The eyes of the court were on her, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, Jennifer Lopez was ready to speak the truth. Your Honor, Jennifer began, her voice steady but emotional. I've spent my entire life trying to build an image, to be the best version of myself, to help others. I've never been perfect, but I've always been honest with my fans and my family. This situation, this scandal, it is not who I am. And I will not let anyone define me based on lies and misunderstandings. I was never involved in any crime, and I will prove that. I did not ask to be in this position, but I will not back down. I will fight to clear my name, not just for me, but for everyone who has supported me along the way. The room was silent as Jennifer finished her statement. She had laid everything on the line. Her words, spoken from the heart, had the power to either undo the damage done or solidify the case against her. She could feel the eyes of the jury, the judge, and even the media on her, waiting for her next move. The stakes had never been higher. This was her showdown, and it would determine the rest of her life. As the defense team prepared to call their next witness, the weight of Jennifer's words hung in the air, leaving everyone to wonder. Could she clear her name? Or would the shadow of the scandal forever alter the trajectory of her career? The courtroom, once filled with doubt, now held its breath, waiting for the final verdict. The courtroom had grown eerily quiet, as if it could sense that the final act of this dramatic trial was about to unfold. It had been a whirlwind of testimony, allegations, and counterarguments, and now Jennifer Lopez was left standing at the crossroads of her career and her personal life. The weight of the moment hung heavy on her shoulders, but she was no longer the woman who had entered the courtroom weeks ago, timid, uncertain, and afraid of the world's judgment. Now, she was a woman on the brink of reclaiming her truth. The defense had rested their case, and the prosecution had laid out its final argument. The judge, who had presided over the trial with a steady hand, had instructed both sides to prepare for closing statements. This was it, the final moment where everything would be decided, where Jennifer's fate would be determined. The public was watching, waiting, and the media had turned this trial into a spectacle. No matter the outcome, the ripples of this case would affect Jennifer for the rest of her life. As Jennifer sat in the defendant's chair, her hands folded in her lap, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led her to this point. The years of hard work, the sacrifices she had made, the risks she had taken, everything seemed to have come down to this single trial. The arrest warrant, the testimony of Ben, the surprise witness, Maria Vasquez. Each moment had tested her strength, her resolve, and her belief in herself. And now, in this final moment, she had one last chance to prove that she was more than the woman the media had painted her to be. The prosecutor, Jessica Green, stood up for her closing remarks. Her voice was calm, collected, and steely as she addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence presented in this trial has been clear. Ms. Lopez was involved in a scandal that she has tried to cover up for years. Ben Affleck's testimony was not just hearsay. It was based on his first-hand knowledge. The witness, Maria Vasquez, has provided a detailed account of the events that transpired, and while the defense has tried to discredit her, the truth is undeniable. Jennifer Lopez's actions have not been above reproach, and the public has every right to question her integrity. We ask you to find her guilty of being complicit in a cover-up that has damaged the reputations of many in Hollywood and beyond. Green's words were sharp, precise, and cut to the heart of the matter. Jennifer knew that the prosecution had done everything in their power to paint her as the villain. But she couldn't back down now. She couldn't let them define her, especially not after everything she had endured. She had faced harder battles in her career, but this one was different. It was personal. When it was time for Jennifer's defense attorney, Thomas Keller, to speak, he rose with a calm assurance that seemed to fill the room. His voice was steady, and his words were carefully chosen. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "we have heard a lot of accusations and claims throughout this trial. But the one thing that has remained consistent is the lack of tangible evidence to support those claims. There is no hard proof that Jennifer Lopez was involved in the scandal in question. What we've seen is a series of assumptions, misinterpretations, and attacks on her character. We have presented clear evidence that the key witness, Maria Vasquez, has a questionable history and no direct knowledge of the events she claims to have witnessed. As for Ben Affleck's testimony, while we respect Mr. Affleck's personal relationship with Ms. Lopez, we must acknowledge that his memory of the events has been unreliable at best, and we urge you to view his testimony with skepticism." Keller paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. Jennifer could feel the weight of his argument, and it gave her a sense of hope that had been all but lost in the chaos of the trial. Jennifer Lopez is not guilty of the crimes she's been accused of. She is a woman who has worked tirelessly to build her career, her brand, and her legacy. She is not a criminal. She is a victim of circumstance, caught up in a scandal she had no part in. The truth is on her side, and it is time to allow her to walk free of these baseless allegations. Jennifer's heart pounded in her chest as Keller finished his closing remarks. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for him and for her entire legal team, who had worked tirelessly to build her defense. But she knew that no amount of legal expertise could change the minds of the jury if they had already made up their own. The waiting game had begun. Would they see through the smoke and mirrors of the prosecution's case? Would they believe her version of events? Or would the shadows of the scandal forever tarnish her image? As the jury deliberated, the courtroom grew increasingly tense. The seconds ticked by, stretching into what felt like an eternity. Jennifer's mind raced as she sat in her seat, waiting for the verdict that could either restore her life or destroy it. In the silence of the room, all she could think about was how far she had come. From the bright-eyed performer who had first stepped into the spotlight to the seasoned, battle-hardened woman she was now, Jennifer Lopez had overcome obstacles that most people would never understand. And no matter what the jury decided, she knew one thing for sure. She had fought with everything she had. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it. There were no distractions now. This was the moment that would define the rest of her life. The weight of the world rested on the decision that would soon be made. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the jury returned to the courtroom. The judge stood, signaling that the verdict was imminent. Jennifer's stomach twisted in knots as she rose to her feet, her hands clammy. Ben Affleck, who had been sitting quietly in the front row, stood with her. His presence offered her some comfort, but she could see the worry in his eyes. He had stood by her, but now he was just as vulnerable as she was. The judge called the room to order. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman of the jury stood and nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge nodded and directed him to read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Jennifer Lopez, not guilty of the charges brought against her." The words hit Jennifer like a wave crashing onto the shore. She felt the air leave her lungs as she exhaled deeply, the tension that had built up over the course of the trial finally dissipating. Her mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. She had won. She had cleared her name. The courtroom erupted into a murmur, some people clapping, others nodding in acknowledgement of the verdict. Jennifer's eyes welled with tears as she looked over at Ben, who was already walking toward her, his arms outstretched. She collapsed into his embrace, her body shaking with relief. "I knew you could do it," Ben whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Jennifer pulled back slightly, looking up at him. "We did it," she said softly. But even as the relief washed over her, she knew the battle wasn't truly over. The media storm would take time to settle, and the scars of the trial would remain. But for now, in this moment, she had reclaimed her name. She had fought for her truth and emerged victorious. The world had tried to tear her down, but Jennifer Lopez had risen above it all. The path ahead would be challenging, but at least now, she could walk it with her head held high. For Jennifer Lopez, this wasn't just a legal victory. It was a personal redemption, a reminder that no matter how dark things may seem, the truth always has a way of coming to light.